This is Amiable Arguments.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Amiable Arguments. I'm Luca, and I'm delighted to bring you the 20th episode of the podcast. And we've got a real treat for you today, actually. Something I think a bit unique and something that's sort of come from my thoughts and Jack's thoughts. So Jack, my housemate who joins me today. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So I set up this studio about a year and a half ago. And because the original purpose was to have it as a space to do some voiceover, set up a reel, and it's a really lovely space. It took months to prepare, so it's got like a nice rug over the table to soundproof that. It's got proper Auralex panels. It's got a divider. You know, it's a really lovely space, and so it was quite strange that I never really had much success because the software I was using was so nitty-gritty. Anyway, there's a point to this because Luca managed to get a lot out of it, which I was really happy by. But it was interesting that I spent so much time and focus in trying to get this together and then barely used it because I just kept hitting this hurdle with technical errors. And this leads me to the story which I've been reading, recommended by Luca, Candide.
Yes, we've basically done a book swap, ladies and gents. That's what today is. It's
Yes.
like a glorified book swap, but we're going to after Jack's made his point a bit about the two books, what's in them, so you're not totally in the dark as to the contents, and then we'll take it from there. So
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I sort of discussed the production of this booth is because, as I say, it very much relates to Candide, because it's all about, you know, you can make immense journeys in life, but then often all it amounts to is very much less than you'd hoped. And so is there anything, could I explain that any better, or should we go into the story, do you think?
Yeah, I think once people have an idea of like the context and content of the two books that we've read, so I tell you what, this'll be, I gave you Candide, and you gave me The Happiest Man on Earth, or in the world, I'm sorry, I can't quite remember, but by Eddie Jaku, the Holocaust survivor. And it's basically the autobiography of his when he went through the purges. So, let's. Shall I do Eddie, because that's the one you gave to me, and then if you explain to the guests about Candide, and we'll do it that way round. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to take it away first?
Okay, yeah. So I've literally just finished this book now. It's taken me about a week and a half to do, which is really good for me. I struggle reading. But what's fascinating about this book is it was written in the late 1700s, and it's one of the easiest reads I've ever had.
I thought the same.
It's no nonsense. It's great. And so it's a satire in which this chap Candide just goes through the worst trials and tribulations. And the question that is asked is that's suggested by his philosopher is, take it away, Luca. What's the quote?
Oh, that we are living in the best of all possible worlds.
Yes. And so Candide, wherever he goes, whatever trials and tribulations he faces, he always says no, but this is the best of possible worlds. Despite, you know,
God could have created.
That God could have created, yeah. I mean, there's even one moment where there's 4,000 people on a ship, and he is basically ordered that each one of them is going to give him like how many lashes?
Oh, yeah, it'll end up being like 4,000 lashes.
Yeah, 4,000 lashes.
35 from each soldier or
something crazy like that. And he still says, but this is the best of possible worlds. And he goes on and on and on. And then, should we kind of fast forward to the end, talk a bit about his love interest and
what his driving force?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he has this love interest that he thinks is dead, Cunigond, and he finds out eventually that she's actually still alive. And after visiting the worst place on earth, as well as paradise. Actually, he goes to what's the place called again?
Oh, El Dorado.
El Dorado, yes. He goes there, and then eventually, when he finds this Candide, she's lost all her beauty. She's been so affected by the world that she's not the girl he knew.
In kind of both body and mind, I think.
Yeah, and so his verdict is that yes, he'll stay with her because he's got that conviction. He's gone through an immense amount to be with this woman, but the author says he doesn't want to be with her, essentially. He's just doing it out of duty. And that goes back to this analogy of really striving for something that you want and putting in all the planning, putting in covering all bases, and then it turns out to be extremely disappointing. And so the reason I kind of raise that and why I think it's an important message in the book is, well, how do you find satisfaction when in reality the future is always disappointing? It's always letting you down. There's always different curveballs,
Yeah. I suppose the thing is as well, Candide kind of puts all of his eggs into one basket. Mm-hmm. The entire pursuit of his happiness lies in this one person.
Yes.
And so what if something happens to that person?
Yeah.
And then as you say, at the end, he's not doing it for his happiness anymore. He's already come to the realization that, actually, she's never going to give me that happiness that I thought she was going to give me.
But his desires are too broad, I would say. They're too reliant on what's out there, extraneous variables. Whereas we meet a character towards the end of the book who is, as Jordan Peterson would say, has just been cultivating his garden. He's got 20 acres?
Something like that.
Yeah, not a lot for a farmer.
Turkish fellow.
Farmer, yeah. And he's got a small family, and the question is asked, do you know what's happened to the king, or some massive news? And he says, no, all I know is that occasionally I send them some of the goods from my garden,
Yes.
And the point being that rather than focusing on those extraneous variables, those world problems, he focuses on what's immediately available.
Yeah.
And whereas Candide has made the mistake throughout the entire book that he's constantly chasing. He's traveling the entire world. He goes to so many different countries to try and achieve this one thing that's beyond his reach. So you've got those two contrasting things.
Yeah.
Is that well explained, do you think? Or is there any kind of... could we delve into any other little...
I'm just thinking. I mean, I like the way that the book explores that different countries and different parts of the world have different expressions of evil. Mm-hmm. For example, Voltaire really loved England for its lack of religious persecution. Mm-hmm. So he really goes hard on Spain and Portugal for their religious persecution in the book. That's what he sort of singles them out as being distinctively weak on. Mm-hmm. But whereas England, it's actually the way that they treat their military.
Yes.
So like he has different criticisms of different countries, and he uses the book to explore those different. In the same way that he kind of criticizes Italy's decadence. It's like, well, you have all these cultural artifacts and all of these things, but it's kind of made you a bit dead.
Yeah.
So like you've overdone it.
Yeah.
You've lost sight of the beauty of simplicity.
Mm-hmm. And I think that garden is the it's the most powerful element of the whole book. It's only about a page or so, comes out of the blue, and it's very simple. But the whole point is that it displays something. A Buddhist teacher that I was listening to on a podcast recently, an American chap, he was raising the question, well, can you be happy when the world around you isn't? He was putting across the case that a record amount of children in America are taking antidepressants, which is insane, But his point being that it's not necessarily because of what's immediately happening to them, it's because of what's surrounding them. So they're in this state because of their environment. And so the question is, can you maintain a sense of happiness when the world around you is suffering? Now, I think the idea of this garden at the end depicts that, doesn't it? You know, it's like, and I think there's something we can take from that, because obviously the way the media works is that the more anxious they can make you, the more angry they make you, the more money they make. You know, that's the way that market works. And so the reason everyone at the moment is obsessed with Ukraine, yes, it is an important issue, don't get me wrong, but we overly focus on these world issues that we cannot change. We can do very little about. Yeah, you could maybe
you could house a refugee.
Yeah, you could support a charity.
Give some money.
There are things you can do,
yes.
But what's out of your control, you shouldn't fret over. You know, yet we're all encouraged to be in this constant state of angst. And so this chap in his garden that is completely, you know, separate from that and keeps himself to himself.
Yes.
And looks after his family and what's immediately available, he manages to overcome that.
Fantastic. And I suppose that talking about, you know, going through all of that suffering to get to the happiness is quite a nice segue into talking about the book that you gave me. And then, so just to clarify for people, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through what happened in the book that Jack gave me. And then we're going to kind of just discuss the two together and focus mainly this podcast around the theme of happiness, as may have already become obvious. But where do you find happiness? What is it? How do you obtain it? How do you keep it? And all of these sorts of questions. So I'll just quickly dive into Eddie Jaku's book, The Happiest Man on Earth, or in the world. Sorry, I can't quite remember what the end was. But I'll post a picture of both of the books on the overlay for this episode. I think that might be quite nice. So essentially, he decided to write this book around the time of his 100th birthday. The gentleman passed away last year in 2021 at the age of 101. So he was born in 1920 in the city of Leipzig in Germany, which is obviously probably the worst time and place to be born in if you're Jewish. And then he becomes a very skilled labourer. His father encourages him to pursue a career or a trade in engineering. And
I think he got a scholarship, didn't he?
Yes. So he becomes very, very good with engineering and machinery, which are all obviously very useful skills to have around the time of an impending war. To feed the war machine. And having this skill saves his life on multiple occasions. And if he hadn't, and you sort of think throughout, if he hadn't have known this particular skill at this particular time, like if his trade had been shoemaking, or if it had been, if it had been an author, then would he have survived? Was it just this particular trade that allowed him to get as far and survive as far as he did? And he wrestles with all of these questions very much. I really applauded the transparency. He was so open, I thought, in the way that he wrote about allowing you to understand what was going through his own mind. He doesn't just relay the events. He's very, very transparent about how he feels about the events, the doubts that he has, the hopes that he has. You know, you really feel, actually, I thought by the end of the book that you'd got to know him.
Yes,
you know.
I mean, he refers to the reader as my friend, which every time I read that, I felt so warm inside, because never had I read a book where I felt like the person was sitting right next to me. You know, it's incredible. It was despite how harrowing, obviously, this tale is of his life, it's a very easy read because it just comes from the heart, you know.
He says in it that by the time it was all over and he'd survived, he was being escorted on one of the death marches because he was in Auschwitz come the end of the war, and obviously the Soviet army was getting closer. And so obviously what the Germans did was they moved them further into the German heartland so that they could better hide the evidence of all the atrocities that they committed. And it's in that time that they're marching to one of the other camps that he manages to escape, and when he reappears, he comes face to face with an American tank, and he's saved, and he gets back to Belgium, which of course he'd actually been able to hide in Belgium in the early 1940s. He'd managed to have a job there. He'd hid in the attic with his family, and so. But he talks about how going back to Belgium just fills him with the ghosts of his past. And there's even one moment, it's the most surreal thing. You couldn't write it into fiction, but this really happened, that he is walking down the street post-war in Brussels, and a man walks past him and goes into a cafe. And Eddie sort of goes, he was wearing my jacket that I lost about 4.5 years ago.
Yeah, unbelievable.
In this city. When I had to trade it for food or something like that. And he confronts a guy about it. And the guy says, oh, no, it's not yours. I had it tailored. And Eddie says, no, I had it tailored. And I know it looks exactly like the one that I had tailored. And lo and behold, he opens the jacket, and the guy, this Belgian guy, can't even read the German writing on the inside of it because it's Eddie's. Yes. And so 5 years later, he found this jacket that he'd lost. But so I suppose to bring that's a general overview, a very brief overview of his experience through the war years. And I only hold back a little bit more so we have more to go into for the later podcast episodes, but also because I really encourage you to read it for yourselves. I truly, truly do. And so, yes, to the Second World War ends, and he gets married. But he explains how hard life was and how much of a hell it kind of was for his wife, because he was so distrustful of everyone, and he was so scared of, when you've gone through the things you've gone through, how can you go to just living a normal life? And he said the thing that turned it around for him was the birth of his son. And that's what gave him a chance to be happy again. To see that he'd actually, for all that he'd done and all that he'd survived, he'd actually been able to put new life out into the world. And the hope for the future, a hope that this child and all of the other children can live a better time than he's had to endure. Yeah,
he had. He described it as having to make a decision, didn't he? It's almost like he had to choose happiness. He didn't necessarily have any reason to. It's not like.
The world wasn't demanding that he was happy.
No, and he hadn't had any recent experiences to suggest that happiness was going to be a possibility for him. He just had to take that leap of faith and choose happiness.
Yes.
And there's a nice parallel there with Candide, because there's an elderly lady in Candide that she's kind of trying to one up one of the characters' misfortunes, in a very outlandish way.
It's like, oh, you've suffered this much? Well, look how much I've suffered.
Exactly.
I mean, it's literally like, it's almost as if Voltaire just beat the Monty Python to the Four Yorkshiremen sketch like 200 years early, where it's like, oh, we used to dream of living in a corridor. We used to live in a septic tank. It's that sort of...
But she talks about the idea of suicide and the fact that she considered it, and that many chose that path. But even though she had no reason to continue, she still pursued it.
She did. Yeah. So what kept her going?
Yeah.
Because that's funny as well. Because that's exactly in Eddie's book. He obviously talks about in Auschwitz and Birkenwald that there was an expression that was created called going up to the wire.
Yes.
Where some of the prisoners in there and the basically Jewish slaves became so obviously beside themselves with their situation, that they would run up to the electric fence to kill themselves. And all the way through this, Eddie is saying to himself, it's really funny because he just says he just refuses to break.
Yes.
And the way that he explains that he was able to do this is to just focus on wherever I can see good, wherever I can see kindness, wherever I can see hope. Focus on those things.
Yes.
Everything is horrible, of course it is, but focus on those tiny shreds of goodness.
Yes.
And know that they can grow out of this. It's funny in a way, not to make some really nerdy comparison, but there's a line in the first Star Wars film, and by first I do mean The Phantom Menace, so I'm talking chronological, with Liam Neeson's character Qui-Gon Jinn, and he sort of says, your focus determines your reality. So if you focus on all of the negatives, and they're the only things that you commit to pursuing and the only things that you ever deal with in your mind, then that's what your outlook is going to be. But even if you can realign and recalibrate your focus to look at goodness, to look at kindness, to look at truth, then you can carry yourself by your bootstraps.
And that's how he became, because this was, the book is called Happiest Man in the World, but this was, this isn't just a title that came out of nowhere. This was Eddie Jaku. He said that. He said, "I'm the happiest man in the world," and that is testament to that. Yes, absolutely. He's
led by example.
Yes,
he really. But what I love as well is how when he goes to Australia, he manages to fulfill so many things. Because he obviously works with Holocaust survivors, and he also passes down lessons to the next generation. But also he shows a tremendous amount of gratitude to the Australian people for taking him in, giving him a new life, making him a new home. And I really had a lovely little smile on my face when I was reading that part about when he said he basically made a service station to work on all the, because obviously he said all the Australian people love their cars, they love their Holdens and everything. So I'm going to build a service station to help them fix their cars, and everything. And it's just, but it's just the motive behind it is so pure, is so kind, is so generous.
Well, it's the same with because obviously they were estate agents, weren't they? Him and his wife, and it's been a year and a half ago since I've read this, but Luca refreshed my mind earlier with what was it he said about being the only nice estate agent you'll ever meet?
Oh yes, he said that frequently, people that they were getting houses for would describe them as the only honest estate agents in Australia.
Well, yeah, because the intention is different. Most estate agents, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not from this walk of life, but it seems to be that you enter that kind of market. Yeah, maybe you've got a bit of skill there, but it's mainly so you can accumulate profit. Whereas I think what I remember is that Eddie Jaku was in this industry. Sure, he was probably wanting to make a bit of wealth for his family, but the main intention there was to provide housing for people because he recognized that they needed it. He recognized there was a need for that market in the same way that you talked about the cars. He saw that there was something that the people wanted. He wanted to provide it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing that really strikes you about him is you can tell even during the war years when he's hiding in the attic with his family in that flat in Brussels that he was never a man who derived his happiness from material gain, because he said that actually, as baffling as it sounds, he was really happy, despite, well, not really happy, but he found in himself something to be happy about.
Yes.
Sure, they were under enormous persecution. They had to work in secret. He would only work night shifts and he'd dodge patrols on his way to work. And he had to trade cigarettes in order to get food and all of these sorts of things. But he found a happiness that he hadn't had because he got to be with his family again. And so his happiness came from his interpersonal relationships. And you feel like that's always where he got his, because it's the same thing that's what kept him going in Auschwitz. He got his happiness from having his best friend Kurt there with him the entire time. And when Kurt was giving up, Eddie wouldn't let him, and when Eddie was giving up, Kurt wouldn't let him.
Yeah. It's not just his own perseverance that enabled this. It was the people around him. Absolutely.
Yeah. He says as well that I'm just trying to remember. I want to get the words right. He talks about how all of these acts of kindness. Because even though on the macro level he's living through absolute hell, on the micro level he just always tries to spot the kindness where he can find it. And he basically just describes it as fuel. You know, he just describes it as a fuel to keep you going.
Well, I guess that's kind of a tending your garden example, isn't it? Because it's like, first, if you can try and see the good in your immediate surroundings, in actions of those around you, and then that can enable you to go out into the world and make more of a change. Whereas if you're focusing on the macro as opposed to the micro, as you were talking about, if all you focus on is all of the horrors and the big picture, then you can't focus. You can't find a way to navigate through that. So he was a master at tending to his garden, wasn't he?
Yeah, but that's interesting as well, isn't it? Because you could genuinely describe it as him sort of cultivating his garden.
Yes.
Which means that there are certain truths about human nature that are ever present in all times, almost, in all times and all places. Because it's the same kind of advice that Voltaire is actually offering 200 years earlier.
Yes.
And so I just find that really interesting that, people from such different times and different cultures and can still find it's like, but we're always asking ourselves how to be happy. And we're always obviously conscious of the fact that most people, happiness is what they want more than anything.
Yeah.
There are things obviously like love and wealth and things such as these, but they're all in aid of granting us happiness.
Yes, and I suppose this was an observation I made the other day. I had a lot of ambitions that I'd been working on, and in some ways I felt that I was actually getting an element of success. So it was, there was a kind of drive there, but there was also an anxiety where I was, yes, but I need to keep going. I need to keep working. And, 2 months ago, I'd be able to sit down, have a few moments to myself, have a tea, just do that. But I found that there was a real challenge. I sat down and I made a cup of tea, and I said, right, I'm going to sit and I'm just going to have this. Not going to do anything else. I'm not going to listen to music.
Just going to enjoy your tea.
Yeah, I'm not going to read Candide. I'm not going to check my phone. Okay. I could not do it. I tried so hard. In about 5 minutes, I was checking my phone.
Right.
Because there was that thing drive me forward. Although I wasn't consciously thinking, it was like, this will make me happy. Eventually, if I tick all of these boxes, the sooner I tick these boxes, this will make me happy. And that's the poison of ambition, isn't it? And ambition is a massive thing in Candide. All of these lords and kings and things like this, they're constantly trying to strive for that next thing, and they never find it.
No, it's like everyone that he meets has got plans and dreams, and it's not until that he gets to the Turk at the end of the story that he actually finds someone who's already fulfilled his dream.
Yeah.
And the reason why he's been able to get his dream is because it was actually just quite a small one in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
He kind of just tempered his own expectations. We don't know a lot about the Turkish man at the end of the story, but you could certainly piece together the idea that he just knows, well, I'm just a simple Turkish farmer. I'm not going to become Grand Vizier. I'm not going to travel the world. As long as I just get myself a good family and a nice plot of land, that's fine.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's almost like there's an innate desire to constantly conquer and to become to one up, to increase your dominance. You can do your further up in the hierarchy of competence. But this chap, the fact is, he had so much more than a lot of other people. A king may well have had his offspring killed in battle.
Yeah.
He would have been stabbed in the back, quite literally. A number of things make him incredibly vulnerable. Yet this man, he's able to maintain a good family. I think 4 kids, something like this.
Something like that, yeah.
And he's got a livelihood. He's got a lot more than a lot of the well-to-dos up the top.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I think one of my favourite things about Candide, though, is actually sort of conversely to the happiest man in the world, is the amount of humour. I mean, it is a satire.
Yeah.
It's not 140 pages of Voltaire going, look how awful the world is. There is beauty to it. There is, and Voltaire, highlights but it's about whether you choose to find the beauty in it. Or whether you choose to reject that because you think that the beauty lies in something that you haven't found yet.
Yes, yeah.
And, I love the part where, you've just read the ending, but that entire premise at the end, well, if you hadn't, if you hadn't been separated from your young love, and if you hadn't basically been put into indentured servitude in the army, and if you hadn't almost been persecuted by the Inquisition, and if you hadn't had to sail across the Atlantic, and if you hadn't discovered a lost kingdom, and if you all these sorts of things, then you wouldn't have wound up here in Constantinople eating cakes. And it's like, yeah, but was that worth it?
Yeah.
And but that's kind of the thing as well, that it's not a very preachy book.
No,
it's not preachy at all.
And even in that bit at the end, you can see it in that perspective. But there's 2 sides to this. The other way of seeing that is, well, you've gone through all these trials and tribulations, but you shouldn't regret that because it's led to where you are now. I often find that whenever I'm feeling like I regret something that's recently happened, I have to think, well, no, this is a clean slate. What would I do if I suddenly woke up and I had to embody this person that's made X, Y, and Z mistakes?
Yes.
You have to go forward. And so don't resent the past because the past has led to where you are now. So there's 2 sides to that argument, isn't there?
Well, it's funny that, actually, because it's very much like something that David Hume, the sort of 1700s Enlightenment philosopher, who I'm pretty sure Voltaire met. They were just about contemporaries.
Yeah.
But Hume everyone in this age of Enlightenment was sort of saying how man is a rational animal and we're driven by reason, and that's what separates us from the animals. And David Hume kind of came along and said, no, we're not driven by reason. We're pretty driven by emotion. And then if we want to do something, we will do it because we're emotionally invested in doing that thing. And it's only after having done that thing, whether it be a good thing or a bad thing, that we then we kind of impose reason on the top of it to justify the fact that we did it, or in order to basically say, this is why I can continue doing it, or this is why I shouldn't have done it. But the reason is secondary to the emotion. The emotion comes first, and then the reason is applied.
Yes, yeah. So the other kind of thing we talked about was when Candide is in this paradise.
Oh, yes, let's talk about that.
Say the name again.
El Dorado.
El Dorado.
Like
El
the
Dorado.
Disney film.
Yeah. So, this place is paved with gold, quite literally. So much so that the locals just see it as rocks,
Yeah, it has no worth as gold.
Yeah.
Because it's just so ubiquitous.
And therefore, everyone there is in a constant state of happiness. One of the reasons behind this is because they're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to expose themselves to the pain of the outside world. And it's really working out for both of these two. And they've only been there for, a few days at this point?
Yeah, this is Candide and Martin.
Candide and Martin, yeah. And they decide, because they're both getting restless and anxious, because they want to be doing something. They're not content being content. They feel like they have to, because they've got that human nature to move to
for adventure,
peril. And so they go head first back into the shit. They've already been there. They've been through so many struggles and horrors, and they go straight back into it because of that human nature. So this is a really interesting point. That famous phrase, "out of the frying pan into the fire."
Yes.
We so often find ourselves in ideal situations, yet we flip it on its head. For some reason, we have this drive to just, it's the kind of the root of our chaos, isn't it? It's, a king can have all the land, he can have a wealthy country, but it's that desire to go and conquer somewhere else.
Yes.
As
the grass is always greener.
Yeah, exactly.
Always. And that's how Candide is. When he leaves, it's because he thinks, well, whatever happiness I can find in El Dorado, I can find even more happiness if I just get to Cunegonde.
Yeah.
If I can just get to a skill that I've been pursuing for so much of my life. He's in his early 20s, so he's like 17, I think, at the start, and he's like in his sort of mid-20s by the end. So he's still young come the end of it, but that's a lot of time for a character to grow, and it's a lot of time for you to change course and sort of recalibrate and think about what you want. But he single-mindedly wants her from the start of the book to the end of the book.
Yeah.
Until he gets her.
Yeah.
Until he gets her.
Yes. And it's because of something so shallow as her looks.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, which is so human.
It's a human nature, yeah. We were discussing the idea that, were the battle over Helen to be won, and then, Helen gets a massive scar on her face, it would all be for nothing. Yeah. Potentially.
It's like, oh, Troy, you can keep her.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going home. No, Odysseus, we don't need to build the horse anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, let's go.
And so it calls into question, were his desires and emotions and just really quite trivial at the end, if it could be defeated by this very simple matter of her not looking the same.
Yeah. But you kind of have hope for him at the end as well.
Yes.
In meeting, you feel like he might, at the very end of the book, just about have understood what he was missing all along. That there might have been just some attempt for him to change course. And it's his line at the end, isn't it, that closes it? So, well, if you hadn't gone through this, and if you hadn't gone through this, as I'd previously said, and Candide says, yes, but we must remember to cultivate our garden.
Yes.
So it's not just about all these big things; it's about working on the little things, which incidentally is what Eddie does.
Yes.
Although Eddie goes on to do all of these incredible things for Australia and the world, he does TED Talks, he wins awards, he helps so many charities, and he does put so much good out into the world. But at the same time, you get the impression that he would, even if you would have taken all of that away from him, he'd still have just been happy having a wonderful family around him, having children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And that's really where he says his joy comes from, watching his grandchildren fall in love.
Yes.
And watching them have children and knowing that... Eddie says that he's not interested in revenge. He says he'll never forgive Germany, because it's not his place to forgive for the 6 million who were massacred. But he can let go of the anger.
Yes.
He can let go of the anger. And he says, and he's not interested in revenge. The only revenge that he's interested in having is the ability to have a good life, which is, almost quote for quote Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely true. Sometimes the best revenge you can have is simply to have a good life.
Yes, and it feels like, because I come from the country, a very rural area of Norfolk. So coming to London, there was a lot of contrasts, and I think it was similar with
same
Luca.
here.
But the fact is, a lot of my friends in the country have settled down. A lot of them have put mortgages on the house. A lot of them have had kids, and a lot of these people are some younger than me. Whereas London, what you see is a lot of ambition, a lot of people paving ways for new technologies, doing fantastic work in many areas, but there is something fundamental left behind, and that is the importance of family. And it's such a key aspect, it's the one thing, as you said, that kept Eddie going, the main driving force. Yet it's devoid in a lot of people at the moment.
The idea of family, and we see there's a lot of fatherlessness. There's a lot of abortion. Which isn't. I'm not getting into whether abortion's good or bad. I'm just saying the quantity of abortion indicates that people actually don't want the children.
Yeah.
They don't want to raise children, or certainly not at that part of the life in which they got pregnant.
Yes.
And so, you see a lot of this, a lot of, I could give very personal stories about this, which I'm going to step away from doing. But I know how grateful I am to be alive, and how grateful I am to know that, my parents wanted to take a chance on me. And to have me, and that's a beautiful thing, and it's given me the greatest adventure.
Yes,
life has given me the greatest adventure, and I just feel enormous gratitude every day.
Yes,
even on the hard days.
Yes,
I feel gratitude for being here.
Yes,
and being able to be a part of the story.
Absolutely,
this great story.
Yeah.
That we're all just playing out because we are all but actors, after all, really.
All the world's a stage and all that.
All those cliches. No, but it is, isn't it? I mean, it's like the C.S. Lewis, sort of says about King Lear, with the servant, the one good servant, the one good character, has about 8 lines and sort of saying, no, we have to stop this, stop the bloodshed. And then they end up getting killed. And it's that thing, none of us know how many lines we get. We don't know when we're going to finish the scene and that's it for the end for us.
Yes.
All we can do is make sure that when we speak lines, we speak good ones.
Yes.
And when we speak lines, we really believe them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was another writer. I feel like it was T.S. Eliot.
Okay.
I don't quote me on this, but
he'll come and fight you.
I must find this quote because I loved it. It's the idea that the present doesn't exist because as soon as you try and grab it, it's turned into the past.
Okay.
The future doesn't exist because it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
The past doesn't exist because
you're no longer living it.
Yeah. So it's
gone.
That is a big wake-up call. We talk about, living in the present, but like you can't hold on to it. But the one thing you can hold on to or endeavor to do is find something in day-to-day life that makes you content. That isn't, I think talking earlier about this tea analogy about how I just couldn't sit down and do that one simple activity.
Yes.
It's finding something to root yourself, because the ambition that your peers will be, emitting, that you'll be witnessing, it will make you desire to compete, to find your own kind of sense of ambition. I think that, the point is you can't. I don't know how to explain this.
No,
do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think I do. I think that what we're basically saying is that happiness is found in meaning.
Yes.
I think that's where you're trying to...
As opposed to the grander sense of something beyond the horizon.
Yeah, no, don't find meaning in pursuing something that you don't have and may never possess.
Yes.
Find meaning in... At least have some semblance of meaning in something that you have right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you don't have a lot of money and if you're pretty down on your luck and you just feel like the world isn't giving you a shot, then at least realise that... I can't remember who it was, but there was something... Oh, was it? It might have been on the Joe Rogan podcast the other day, but I can't quite remember where I heard it, actually, so I better not say concretely. But someone was sort of saying, just take a piece of paper and take a pen and write down all of the things that you're grateful for.
Yes.
That give you reasons to get up every day and just go out there and live the next day. Yeah,
I tried that. Someone else from elsewhere also said a very similar thing. Because what I do a lot of note taking, and one of the things I used to do...
I should do more.
Yeah, one of the things I used to do is I'd note down things that I wanted to improve, and quite often...
To cultivate, you might say.
Well, yes, you would say that, but unfortunately it used to be, I'd say, a little bit on the cynical side, a little bit on the pessimistic side, things that I wasn't doing well enough.
Yes.
And the moment I heard, what am I grateful for? As soon as you write that down, it's so much. It just alleviates so much. You're like, okay, this is less of a big issue than I think. I can actually move forward with this because I've given myself some positive feedback in which I can develop, as opposed to writing a bunch of stuff, that's just beating you down.
Yes,
it's a great activity to do it.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely give it a shot.
Yeah,
I think I'll definitely do it. I'd be really interested to see what the results are. I think I'd be really interested to see what I write.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to see what comes out the end of that pen.
Yeah.
So there was something else that I was going to add to this, which was that, to add to your sort of things to improve on and cultivate, as it were, is that, it's like with this podcast. I'm constantly aware, and I'm very grateful to all of those who are listening to this right now, or indeed anyone who's given me a minute of your time to listen to anything that I've said, because I realise one of the things that is always at the forefront of my mind is the preciousness of time. And that we all, from the moment we wake up every day, we have to choose what we're going to do with our time.
Yeah.
We have to choose what we're going to listen to, how fast we're going to walk somewhere because of how much of a hurry we're in. We're constantly governed by time.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that's always at the forefront of my mind in making this podcast. And so it encourages me to, okay, well, I need this to be worthy of people's time.
Yes.
Because, again, I want them to be happy.
Yes.
When they're listening to it,
Yeah.
I want them to get to the end of this podcast and feel like, oh yeah, I've had a really good experience listening to that. And so there's audio to clean up. I'm constantly thinking about trying not to, do that. Just and my way through sentences, which is a really hard thing to do, but I'm working on it, and I'm always conscious of trying to speak with a bit more fluidity.
But I think there's a reason that we do ums and ers. I always used to think that, well, why can't you just replace it with silence? Just think, rather than going But actually, one of the things that happens to me is sometimes if I don't put in those fillers, suddenly I blank. It happened earlier where I had to get you to fill in one of my arguments.
Oh, right, yes.
Because I'd lost my trail, and I think the ums and ers kind of keep you on that track, don't they?
Yes.
Without floating off. But yes, there is that desire to speak as specifically as you can.
Yes.
Which can sometimes be quite stressful, but also very necessary,
But again, this all ties back into happiness. It's just the idea of, okay, I think it also just comes from, it's a gratefulness for what you have, but just enjoying the process of getting a little bit better at things.
Yes.
Of seeing the things, as if we're both obviously fans of Jordan Peterson. And it's that case of don't compare yourself to who someone else is today. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I love that. I really, really love that premise. I think those are really words to live by.
Yes.
Because everyone has different circumstances in their life, and we don't start at the same place. And so it's not always fair to judge ourselves against other people.
Yes.
Judge yourself against yourself. Are you slacking? Are you happy? Are you grateful for the things that you have? Are there things do you have realistic visions of the future?
And there are really easy measures to that, I find. Like, for example, the other day, I was having a succession of every day. I know a lot of people are going through this fad, which is great. It's, taking a cold...
It's great, but I'm going to describe it as a fad.
Well, yeah, why not? Because taking a freezing cold shower.
Yes.
Like, I was doing that every day. And then one day I was like, nah. Do you know what? I fancy a bit of comfort. I'm gonna have the hot. And that was a little message to myself. It's like, oh, hang on. I'm not, I'm down performing at the moment. I'm not. My previous self was my yesterday self was actually kicking ass, whereas today I'm slacking a bit.
Yeah.
So there are little things. You don't have to say. You don't have to make it a macro problem. You can just analyze tiny little aspects of your day.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be something as big as, well, yesterday I was employed and now I've been fired.
Yeah.
It's like it can be little things as well.
Yes, absolutely.
But I love that. I mean, Voltaire in particular, obviously, as a playwright, and you and I, with our background in acting, I think that's what. It's the reason I love acting. It's the reason why all of those things have always had an importance to me. Because to me, acting is about Acting is the. I'm trying to think of the word. It's the investigation of the human condition. It's exploring through text and dialogue and human interaction why people do the things they do, why they come to the decisions about things that they do, what forces people to leap to that call of adventure, what makes other people never want to leave their front doors.
Yes.
It's about it's to analyze and just sort of think about human nature, to contemplate, and I love that.
Yeah, and I've sort of been fairly recently. I've been finding different ways to open new doors when I'm speaking to people, trying to make my conversation as interesting as possible, because there's a real art to conversation, isn't there? And so often we only reach the surface, and to suggest that there are boring people in this world is utter bullshit. You just haven't managed to dig deep.
Oh, I don't know. I think I could find one or two.
Yeah, but for example, I do this. I work at the Crystal Maze, which is a bit like an escape room. There's a lot of interaction and improvisation. And one of the things I do at the beginning is I try and get everyone to tell me something fascinating about themselves. And a lot of them, they just go for like, oh, I got a dog the other week, that kind of thing. But
which is nice.
Which is cool, yeah, fine. But actually, the more you probe gently, you can get some really fascinating stuff out of them. But it's getting there, isn't it? So often we end up satisfied with or maybe not satisfied, but it's habitual that we only touch the surface level.
Yeah, that we're a bit more reserved.
And it's a shame, because there are cultures in the world where that's not so much the case.
Yes. I mean, it's funny. I have a French friend, and she said that one of her experiences about coming to Britain was that, generally speaking, the English people didn't wear their hearts on the sleeves as much as the French.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about our emotions as much. We didn't really. We're a bit more cold, a bit more reserved. I don't know to what extent that's true. I personally think that we have an enormous amount of joy and humour. I just think it's a very, very particular sort. But obviously, I respect her observation.
Yes, yeah.
So, okay, we're coming up to the hour mark now. So, do you have any final things that you sort of want to say to the audience about happiness? Things that you've learned from reading these books, or from talking together, or things that you'd like them to take away?
I think we've covered most bases.
Well, that was anticlimactic.
To be honest, do
you have anything to share? No.
well, the studio that we're in, it's really quite a small space, and you've got a curtain, like a thick curtain over the top. You've got a big old duvet insulation, and it's so hot that actually it starts to play tricks with your mind. Where at the end, I think we're reaching the end of the hour, and I think any tiny little fragments of wisdom left about 30 minutes ago
have melted from us through sweat.
Yeah, but I think the only thing I would say is it was a bit of an experiment, sort of comparing Candide with Happiest Man in the World, because they're both incredibly different. Yeah, they've got similarities, as a lot of books do, but they're very different. But one thing I would say, the reason we did this is because they're both books that we loved, and therefore we wanted to share, and compare. I would say really give these a read. Both in their own right, they're so digestible, and worth every minute of your time. I really can't recommend them enough.
No, neither can I. I actually I wrote a review of Voltaire's Candide on my Instagram, which I'll link that below, where I gave some thoughts on it and some reflections, and also whilst stating just how much of a joy it was to read. I mean, it really is. He's such a wit. And again, as regards to the other book with Jaku's Happiest Man in the World, I'm just so grateful that I read that book. Yeah. And to be honest with you as well, I think that I've read that book at the exact right time in my life as well.
It's interesting how that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'm so grateful that I don't want this to sound twisted in any way, but I feel like he's allowed me to see something that I was missing.
Yes.
And that's the thing that he said. He doesn't tell his story. He constantly puts this clearly in the sort of final chapters. He says, I'm not telling you my story of what I endured and the hell that I went through in order for me to pour out my emotions and for all of these things. I don't want you to look at this and see sadness. I want you to look at this and see hope.
Yes.
I want you to look at this and see that even when things are absolutely dire, there can be things beautiful on the other end. My best friend, he's just given me some news where there'd been a thing plighting him and his life for a good number of years now. For us, when I've met him, this thing came along, and he had an awful time. There was a girl, and things were complicated, and they couldn't be together in the way that they wanted to. And now there's a possibility for that to be. All he had to do was wait 4 years. But, so it's so crazy. But that's life. You never know. And so, I think they're beautiful books. And I hope people have enjoyed this. As Jack says, it has been quite experimental. I didn't quite know how the pieces of this would fall into place. But you know what? I thought we're going to give it a try.
Yes.
And that's the thing with these podcasts. I'm never going to stop trying. I really enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking to the people who leave comments. I enjoy talking to the people who, comment on my Instagram or send me messages. And, so that ability, that gives me meaning as well. I find a great amount of happiness in doing this. And I hope that some people today might have found some happiness in listening to it. So thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure being on. It's been long enough.
It has.
20 podcasts down.
Yeah, 20 podcasts down and living with each other the entire time.
Yeah.
I mean, because Jack and I have we've had so many conversations, late night conversations where we've been talking about books and films and philosophy. And we said, if only we had a microphone right next to us, this would make a great podcast. Yeah. And I was like, well, why don't we do it? And you're like, it has to be spontaneous. And so we're just finally here. This is actually going to be the last podcast for a while, folks, because we're both moving out and we have different things to set up. We have And again, we have to recalibrate. We have to figure out what's coming next. So I'll do a little channel update. I'm going to write a script where I'll just sort of give some a channel update on what the future's going to be, how steady things are going to be, and how I'm just sort of going to reshape things for the time being to be better suited to things are going to be a bit more social media focused for a little bit, I think, and less focused on the actual podcasts themselves. But that's a thing for another video. So yeah, thanks for listening very much, ladies and gents. It's been great having your support as always. Jack, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
I'm happy.
Yeah, good. I think I am as well.
Oh, good. Then we've done it. There we are. We've talked ourselves into happiness.
Good.
And yes, thank you to Irina for the artwork. I'll put it in the thumbnails for this video and for the audio tracks on Spotify. All my social medias are down below if you want to get a hold of me to tell me that you think I'm great, or if you want to tell me that there are some things that I've definitely got to work on. I welcome it all. So until the next time, whenever it may be, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a very pleasant weekend.